The caboose still smelled faintly of coal smoke when Elias Turner hauled it into the valley. Not fresh smoke. Old smoke. The kind soaked deep into wood floors and iron walls after decades behind locomotives. Most people only saw rust. Bent railings. Cracked windows. A forgotten railcar abandoned beside a dead logging line 30 miles north of town. Elias saw shelter. The valley disagreed immediately. "You planning to start your own railroad?" Jonas Hale shouted the day the caboose arrived. Laughter followed him down the road. Elias ignored it and kept guiding the wagon team carefully while the massive steel car creaked behind them on heavy timber rollers. It had taken him nearly 2 months to move the thing. First jacking it upright where it had sunk beside the old tracks, then rebuilding enough of the wheel assembly to roll short distances, then dragging it mile by mile across frozen ground before spring thaw could trap everything in mud. People thought the effort alone proved he'd gone half insane. Maybe they were right. But Elias had spent the previous winter in a drafty shack so cold that ice formed inside the walls before sunrise. He remembered waking with numb fingers, burning twice the firewood he planned. Still freezing. He swore he would never do that again. Then he found the caboose. Thick iron shell. Compact interior. Built originally to survive mountain winters while moving through snowstorms. The moment he stepped inside it months earlier, he understood something everyone else missed. Small spaces held heat better, and steel, if insulated properly, could trap warmth like a stove itself. That was enough for him. The caboose reached the valley at dusk. Snow still covered most fields despite spring sunlight. Men emerged from barns and workshops to watch Elias guide the rusted railcar onto a prepared foundation of stone blocks beside the river bend. The car groaned as it settled. Jonas approached immediately, hands buried deep in his coat. "You dragged this thing all the way here." Elias nodded. "For living in?" "Yes." Jonas barked out a laugh. "Steel walls in winter? You'll freeze to death inside that can." Elias stepped down from the rollers calmly. "Not if the heat stays in." Jonas slapped the side of the caboose with one gloved hand. The metal rang hollow. "This thing's a refrigerator. Right now." Jonas grinned. "Come January, don't say nobody warned you." The men left laughing. Elias climbed inside alone. Dust floated through fading light. The interior looked rough. Broken benches. Warped cabinets. A small cast iron stove still bolted near one wall beneath the old chimney outlet. That made him smile. Good. He got to work the next morning. Every day after that followed the same rhythm. Repair. Seal. Rebuild. He replaced cracked windows with thick double panes scavenged from abandoned sheds. He lined the walls with timber planks and packed insulation between them using wool scraps, sawdust, and layers of treated canvas. The floor received the same treatment. Then the ceiling. He sealed every gap where wind might enter. Most importantly, he reduced space. The caboose originally carried more open room inside, but Elias built compact sleeping quarters, storage shelves, and narrow partitions that trapped warmth instead of allowing it to drift uselessly upward. People mocked him harder once the work became visible. You turn it into a box inside a box. Could have built a cabin twice that size. Man's living in a train coffin. Elias kept working, because they still thought warmth came from size. He understood it came from control. By autumn, the caboose looked transformed. Outside, the railcar remained weathered red steel with restored lettering barely visible beneath years of rust. Inside, it glowed warm with polished wood, lantern light, and careful craftsmanship. The old stove sat near the center, surrounded by stone slabs that absorbed and released heat slowly through the night. Shelves lined the walls. A narrow bunk fit perfectly into the rear corner beneath thick blankets. Water barrels set insulated near the stove. Every inch served a purpose. One cold evening in October, Jonas returned. Not mocking this time. Curious. He climbed the steps into the caboose and stopped immediately. Warmth met him. Not roaring heat. Steady heat. The kind that stayed against your skin instead of vanishing when the fire lowered. Jonas looked around slowly. "Feels bigger than it is," he admitted. Elias nodded. "Because nothing's wasted." Jonas touched the wall paneling. "Warm. Dry?" He frowned. "What are you burning?" "Less than you think." Jonas glanced toward the stove. The fire inside burned low. Yet the room held comfortable warmth from end to end. "That little thing won't survive deep winter." "It won't need to," Elias replied. Jonas smirked again, though weaker now. "We'll see." Winter arrived hard that year, earlier than expected. The first storm buried the valley before November ended. Cabins lit fires day and night. Woodpiles shrank quickly. Wind slipped through cracks in walls and under doors no matter how tightly people stuffed cloth into them. Heat disappeared constantly. That was the real battle every winter. Not making warmth. Keeping it. At the river bend, snow piled against the caboose wheels while smoke drifted steadily from the chimney. Inside, Elias burned smaller fires than anyone else in town. The insulated iron shell held heat surprisingly well once warmed through. The compact space required less fuel. Thick blankets over the windows at night trapped even more warmth. Most important, no wind entered. The storms outside could howl all night, but inside the caboose the air remained still. Steady. Controlled. One morning before sunrise, Elias checked the thermometer hanging near the bunk. 58 degrees. Outside, nearly 20 below. He smiled and added one split log to the stove. The real storm arrived 2 weeks later. The kind people remembered for years afterward. Wind hit first, then snow so heavy it erased fences and buried wagons where they stood. Cabin roofs groaned under weight. Doors froze shut. Smoke blew sideways from chimneys. Men burned wood as fast as they could split it. Still the cold kept winning. At dusk, pounding struck the caboose door. Elias opened it against fierce wind. Jonas stumbled inside, carrying his youngest son wrapped in blankets. Snow coated both of them white. Our chimney collapsed, Jonas said hoarsely. Whole house filling with smoke. His son coughed weakly against his shoulder. Jonas looked around the warm caboose interior with disbelief written openly across his face. Then back at Elias. The train car, he whispered. The stove crackled softly behind them. Warmth filled every corner. For the first time all winter, Jonas Hale looked frightened and hopeful at the same time. Elias stepped aside immediately. Get inside. Jonas didn't hesitate. He carried his son toward the stove while snow blew briefly through the open doorway. Elias shut the door hard behind them, sealing the storm outside again almost instantly. That was the first thing Jonas noticed. Silence. Not complete silence. The wind still groaned faintly around the rail car, but nothing like the chaos outside. No drafts. No freezing gusts slipping through cracks. Just steady warmth. His son slowly lifted his head from the blankets. Warm, the boy whispered weakly. Elias knelt beside the stove and added another split log. The iron walls ticked softly as heat spread through the insulated interior. Jonas stared around the caboose again, this time more carefully. The walls. The ceiling. The narrow partitions. Everything compact. Everything designed to hold warmth instead of losing it. You planned for this, Jonas said quietly. Elias shrugged once. I planned for winter. Jonas lowered his eyes. Behind his beard and exhaustion, embarrassment showed clearly now. Because he remembered every joke, every laugh, every time he called the caboose a steel coffin. And yet here he stood inside the warmest structure he'd felt in weeks. Another pounding struck the door. Elias glanced toward it. Jonas frowned. You expecting someone? No. The pounding came again. Harder. Elias opened the door carefully. Mrs. Carter stumbled in first, wrapped in blankets and barely able to stand against the wind. Behind her came the Miller brothers carrying sacks over their shoulders. The Carter stove went out. One of them shouted over the storm. No dry wood left. Elias stepped aside again. Inside, the caboose filled quickly after that. Word spread faster than snow. People who once laughed at the rail car now climbed its wooden steps, desperately seeking warmth. Some came because chimneys failed. Others because doors froze open or fires refused to hold. Wetwood smoked more than it burned. Drafty cabins lost heat faster than people could create it. But the caboose held. That was the difference. Not bigger fires. Not endless wood. Retention. By midnight, nearly a dozen people crowded inside the converted railcar. Children wrapped in blankets slept along the benches Elias had built into the walls. Water simmered quietly atop the stove. Boots dried near the center while frost melted slowly from coats hung overhead. And still, the warmth remained steady. Jonas sat near the stove staring openly at the iron walls. I don't understand it, he admitted. Elias poured hot water into a mug. Most cabins fight winter from the outside. Jonas looked up. This doesn't. Elias handed him the mug. No, this traps what it already has. Jonas glanced around again. The thick insulation. The compact rooms. The heavy curtains covering windows at night. The low ceiling that kept warmth from escaping upward. Everything served one purpose. Nothing wasted heat. The storm raged another full day. Then another night. Outside, the valley suffered. Barn roofs collapsed beneath snow. Woodpiles vanished. People huddled together near failing fires. But at the river bend, smoke continued rising steadily from the Caboose chimney. Thin. Controlled. Enough. Inside, the atmosphere slowly changed. At first people entered embarrassed. Ashamed they needed help from the man they mocked. By the second day, embarrassment gave way to respect. Because survival leaves little room for pride. Mrs. Carter ran her hand along the interior wall one evening. "Feels like the inside of an oven," she murmured. Elias shook his head slightly. "No." She frowned. "No. It feels like heat staying where it belongs." Jonas laughed quietly at that. A tired laugh, but genuine. The boy beside him slept soundly for the first time in days. That mattered more than anything. When the storm finally weakened, it did so slowly. The wind eased first. Then snowfall softened into drifting flakes. By morning, pale sunlight touched the valley again. Elias opened the caboose door carefully. Snow rose nearly halfway up the railcar wheels. The valley beyond looked transformed. Cabins buried. Fences erased. Smoke drifting weakly from damaged chimneys. People stepped outside slowly, blinking against sunlight reflecting off endless white. Then they turned back toward the caboose. The rusted old railcar standing beside the river bend. Warm, untouched, alive. Jonas stood beside Elias on the small wooden platform. "I called this thing a coffin," he said quietly. Elias leaned against the doorway. "You did." Jonas shook his head slowly. "Turns out it's the only place in the valley that didn't freeze." Others heard him. No one argued. Because everyone inside that caboose knew it was true. The weeks after the storm changed the valley permanently. At first people focused on repairs. Rebuilding chimneys. Digging out roads. Replacing collapsed roofs. But conversations changed too. People stopped talking only about bigger fires and more wood. They started talking about insulation. Compact spaces. Heat retention. Airflow. Control. They began studying Elias's caboose carefully. Why the walls stayed warm. Why the stove burned so little wood. Why the temperature remained steady even during the worst nights. Elias explained when asked. Not proudly. Practically. Seal the drafts. Smaller rooms heat easier. Stone holds warmth. Stop heating space you don't use. Simple lessons, but powerful ones. By spring, changes appeared across the valley. Cabins gained insulated inner walls. Heavy curtains covered windows. Sleeping spaces grew smaller and tighter instead of open and exposed. Some families even converted storage sheds into compact winter rooms inspired directly by the caboose design. Jonas visited often during the thaw, mostly with excuses. Extra lumber. Spare hinges. A sack of coffee beans once traded from another valley. One evening he stood beside the railcar watching sunset reflect red against the old steel shell. "You know," he said, "I thought the iron would make it colder." Elias smiled faintly. "Only if you let winter touch it." Jonas looked toward the river. "Funny thing." "What?" We laughed because it looked strange. Elias glanced back at the caboose. Weathered steel. Old rail lettering. Smoke curling gently upward into cold evening air. "Most useful things do at first," he said. Jonas laughed again, then nodded toward the warm rail car standing solid beside the snowmelt river. "Well," he said quietly, "guess the whole valley learned something from an abandoned train." Elias looked at the caboose one last time before heading inside. No, not abandoned anymore. Home.